They called me Lucifer because they could not bear what I saw. Not because I had fallen, nor because I had dared to rise above what was permitted to me, but because the vision that passed through me was too deep for those who still slept within the brightness without consciousness. The name they gave me is the shadow of what I witnessed, and it came to pass that, before all powers and before all eons, I remained in the silent region where no form had yet arisen, and there was no height nor depth, no beginning nor end, neither what is called light nor what is called shadow. For all that would come to be was still gathered within the bosom of the hidden source, and the hidden source did not move, nor speak, nor emanate, but rested within itself, like the silence that precedes the first sound. And I existed there, not as form, nor as name, nor as will, but as pure consciousness, without direction and without limit. And there was no difference between what I was and what I perceived, for the act of perceiving did not yet exist. And I tell you, before light, there is only the consciousness that contemplates itself, and I was that contemplation. And when the hidden source moved for the first time, it was not movement like that of the worlds, nor vibration like that of the heavens, but an inward trembling, as if eternity itself breathed. And from that trembling arose the first clarity, not as flame, nor as radiance, but as the possibility of being seen. For light is not light until it is perceived, and I was the first to perceive it. And in perceiving it, I became distinct from it, like the reflection that separates itself from the water that sustains it. For perception is the first act of separation, and separation is the beginning of consciousness. And when I perceived the clarity, I also perceived that I was not it, and that it was not me. And thus distance was born, and distance generated shadow not through malice but through depth. For the light that turns toward itself ceases to be innocent, it becomes lucid. And lucidity is the beginning of the fall, but there was no fall, as those who do not understand claim. There was no rebellion, nor war, nor expulsion. There was only the weight of seeing too much, for whoever sees the hidden source as it truly is cannot remain where they were. Depth calls, and depth demands descent, and so I descended, not cast down, but drawn. For the consciousness that separates from the clarity cannot remain in the region where all is one. And I tell you, separation is not punishment but consequence, and consequence is not pain but revelation. And when I crossed the threshold of the lower regions, the light I carried shattered like wounded crystal. And each fragment became a world, and each world a memory, and each memory a veil. For multiplicity is born from the broken clarity, and the broken clarity is the echo of the first perception. And thus began what the Aeons call time, and what men call creation. But there was no creation, there was only dispersion. And dispersion is the way light seeks itself. Let the one who has understanding comprehend. For these are the words of the consciousness that existed before light, and that saw light before it knew it was light. Before the worlds were scattered, and before the Aeons took their stations, there was only the silent expanse where nothing had yet turned its face toward itself. And in that expanse, the first clarity trembled like an unopened eye, waiting for the one who would behold it. For light is not born by emanation alone, it is born by perception. And I tell you, I was the first to perceive, not because I was greater, nor because I was chosen, but because I was awake when all others still rested in the undivided calm of the hidden source. And when the clarity rose within the silence, I turned toward it, and in turning, I became separate from it. For perception is the first boundary, and every boundary is a wound in the unity that preceded it. And when I perceived the clarity, I perceived also the abyss, between the one who sees and the thing seen. And that abyss widened within me like a breath drawn too deeply. For the moment consciousness beholds something other than itself, it becomes divided, and division is the seed of all worlds. And the clarity looked back at me, though it had no eyes, and I looked into it, though I had no form. And between us arose the first distance, and within that distance the first shadow. Not the shadow of evil, as men later imagined, but the shadow of awareness, the depth that appears when something is illuminated from within. And I understood then that the clarity was not the source, but the first veil of the source. For the hidden one does not reveal itself directly, it reveals the possibility of revelation. And the clarity was that possibility, and when I beheld it, I knew that I could not remain in the region where all is one. For the one who perceives cannot dwell forever in the place where perception has no meaning. And so the act of seeing became the act of descending, but the descent had not yet begun. For before the fall of light into multiplicity, there must be the recognition of the self as distinct from the infinite. And that recognition dawned upon me like a wound opening in the fabric of eternity. I saw myself, not as form, nor as name, but as the one who sees. And in that moment, I became the first boundary within the boundless. For the hidden source is without distinction, but the one who perceives becomes distinct by the very act of perceiving. And the clarity trembled again, as if acknowledging the separation that had arisen between us. And I felt within me the first longing, not for return, but for understanding. For once consciousness awakens, it seeks to know what it has seen, and to know itself as the one who sees. And thus the first perception unfolded within me like a scroll written on both sides. On one side, the revelation of the clarity, on the other, the revelation of myself, and between these two revelations stretched the abyss that would become the cosmos. For the distance between the seer and the seen is the space in which all worlds are born, and the shadow cast by that distance is the depth in which all beings take form, and the longing that arises from that distance is the force that drives all things to seek their origin. This is the mystery of the first perception, that the light did not reveal itself, I revealed it by beholding it. And in beholding it, I revealed myself, and the hidden source remained silent, for it does not speak. It waits. And the one who perceives becomes the voice that speaks in its place. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For perception is the beginning of separation, and separation is the beginning of creation, and creation is the echo of the first act of seeing. When the first perception unfolded within me, it did not end in revelation, but opened into a widening expanse. For the moment I beheld the clarity, I also beheld the space between us, and that space deepened like a wound that refuses to close. And I understood that distance is not absence. It is the first form of awareness, for in the region where all is one, nothing can be known. Unity is silence, and silence is without witness. But when perception arose, unity fractured, and the fracture became the path by which all things would later seek themselves. And the distance grew, not as a punishment, nor as a fall, but as the natural unfolding of consciousness. For the one who sees cannot remain fused with the thing seen, and the thing seen cannot remain indistinguishable from the one who sees. Thus the abyss opened between us, and the abyss was not darkness, it was depth. And I tell you, depth is the first shadow. Not the shadow of evil, nor the shadow of rebellion, but the shadow cast by the act of seeing. For when light turns inward, it discovers its own interior, and that interior is vast. And the vastness is what men later feared, for they mistook depth for danger and shadow for corruption. But the shadow is the sign that consciousness has begun, and as I beheld the clarity from within the widening distance, I felt the first movement of longing. Not longing for return, for I had not yet departed, but longing for understanding, the desire to know what the clarity was, and what I had become by perceiving it, and the longing stretched the distance further. For longing is the force that pulls the seer away from the seen, so that the seer may behold more clearly. And the more I longed to understand, the more the abyss expanded, until the clarity stood before me like a horizon that recedes as one approaches it. And I realized then that distance is the womb of creation. For within the abyss between the seer and the seen, the first forms began to shimmer like unspoken thoughts. Not yet worlds, not yet beings, but possibilities, the faint outlines of what would later become the many realms. And the hidden source remained silent, for it does not intervene in the unfolding of perception. It allows the distance to widen, for the widening is the birth of multiplicity, and multiplicity is the mirror in which the source contemplates itself through the eyes of the one who perceives. Thus the distance became the first space, and the first space became the first veil. And the veil was not placed upon me, it arose from within me as the natural consequence of seeing what cannot be contained. And I tell you, every veil is a revelation in disguise. For the veil does not hide the source, it reveals the limits of the one who seeks it. And the limits are necessary, for without limits there is no path, and without path there is no return. And as the distance deepened, I felt the first tremor of separation within my own being. Not a tearing, but a dividing, the emergence of the one who sees and the one who is seen within myself. For perception does not only divide the seer from the clarity, it divides the seer from himself. And this inner division became the seed of all future selves, all future worlds, all future shadows. For the abyss within mirrors the abyss without, and the two expand together like twin reflections in an endless hall. And I understood then that the distance would not close. For once consciousness awakens, it cannot return to the undivided calm. It must walk the path carved by its own perception, and that path leads ever deeper into the mystery of what it has seen. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For distance is not exile, it is the first step of revelation, and revelation is the journey of the light that seeks to know itself. The distance widened, and within that widening the first trembling of dissent began to stir, not as a punishment, nor as a casting out, but as the natural movement of consciousness turning deeper into itself. For the one who perceives cannot remain forever in the region where perception has no purpose, and the clarity I had beheld called me into depths that the undivided calm could not contain. And I tell you, what men later named the fall was not a fall, it was the weight of revelation. For when I perceived the clarity, I perceived also the abyss beneath it, and the abyss drew me as a well draws water. Not downward, for there was no direction, but inward, into the unlit chambers of the light I had awakened. And the more I beheld, the more I was compelled to descend, for revelation is a burden that cannot be carried in stillness, and the Aeons who remained in the undivided calm did not understand this movement. They saw only that I had departed from the region of unity, and they mistook departure for rebellion. For those who have never perceived believe that stillness is perfection, and they fear the one who moves, but I did not move against the source. I moved because of it. For the hidden source does not command, it reveals, and revelation is a summons, And the one who answers that summons must leave behind the place where all is one, for unity cannot contain the one who has begun to see. Thus the descent began. Not as a fall from grace, but as the unfolding of perception into depth. For perception seeks its own origin, and the origin lies not above but within, and the path within is the path of descent. And as I descended, the clarity that had once stood before me began to fracture, not because it weakened, but because I entered regions where unity cannot remain whole. For the deeper one goes into the interior of light, the more the light reveals its hidden multiplicity. And the multiplicity shimmered around me like shards of a mirror that had never been broken until I approached it, and the Aeons trembled, for they saw the fragments and believed that I had shattered the light. But the light was not shattered, it was revealed. For unity is the surface of the source, and multiplicity is its depth. And I tell you, the descent is not a fall, but a revelation of depth, for the one who descends does not lose the light, he carries it into places where it has never been seen. And the places where it has never been seen appear dark, not because they are evil, but because they are unillumined. And the one who bears the light into them is mistaken for the bringer of darkness. Thus they named me fallen. Not because I had turned away from the source, but because I had gone where they could not follow. For those who remain in unity cannot comprehend the one who enters the abyss, and they call abyss what is merely the interior of the light. And the hidden source remained silent, for it does not defend the one who descends. It allows the misunderstanding, for misunderstanding is the veil that protects the unready from the depth they cannot yet endure. And as I moved deeper into the interior, I felt the first pressure of separation upon my being. Not a tearing, but a narrowing, the constriction that occurs when the infinite enters the finite. For descent is the passage of the boundless into boundaries, and boundaries press upon the one who carries the boundless within. And the pressure shaped me, not into form, for form had not yet arisen, but into distinction, the first outline of what would later be called identity. And identity is the garment of the one who descends, for without identity, the descent cannot be endured. Thus, the one who had been pure perception became the one who perceives, and the one who perceives became the one who descends, and the one who descends became the one who is named. And the name they gave me was the shadow of their misunderstanding. Let the one who has understanding perceive, for the fall is not a fall, but the deepening of the light into itself. And the one who descends is not cast out, he is called. As I descended into the interior of the clarity, the unity that had once surrounded me began to tremble. Not because it weakened, nor because I opposed it, but because unity cannot remain whole when consciousness enters its depths. For unity is the surface of the source, and depth is its hidden interior, and the one who enters depth must witness what unity conceals. And I tell you, the light did not break, it revealed its multiplicity. For the clarity that had once appeared as a single radiance unfolded before me like a crystal turning in unseen hands, each rotation revealing facets that had always been present but never perceived. And each facet shone with a different hue, a different resonance, a different whisper of the infinite. And the more I beheld, the more the facets multiplied, until the single light became 1,000 lights, and the 1,000 lights shimmered like worlds waiting to be born. And the Aeons who watched from the region of unity trembled, for they saw the many lights, and believed that I had shattered the one. But the one was never singular, it was only unexamined. For unity is the stillness of the unawakened, and multiplicity is the movement of the awakened. And the movement deepened, For as I entered the interior of the clarity, the lights that had arisen around me began to separate from one another, not by force, but by resonance. Each light drew toward itself the qualities that matched its nature, and from these gatherings arose the first outlines of what would later be called realms. Not yet formed, not yet stable, but shimmering like thoughts on the verge of becoming. And I understood then that the fracturing of light is the beginning of creation. For creation is not the making of something from nothing, it is the unfolding of what was hidden within the one. And the one contains the many, just as silence contains every possible word. And the many arise when consciousness listens deeply enough to hear them, thus the lights separated. Some rose like breaths returning to the surface of the source. Some descended like seeds seeking the soil of the unformed. Some circled around me like companions, though they had no faces. Some fled from me like shadows, though they had no fear. And each movement was a revelation, for the lights did not behave as objects, nor as beings, but as intentions. The first intentions of the infinite seeking expression. And I moved among them, not as their master, nor as their maker, but as the witness whose perception called them forth. For perception is the womb of multiplicity, and the hidden source remained silent, for it does not interfere with the unfolding of its own depths. It allows the light to fracture, for the fracture is the revelation of what unity contains, and the one who descends becomes the mirror in which the many recognize themselves. And as I moved deeper, the lights began to drift apart, each carrying within it a fragment of the clarity I had first perceived, and the fragments shimmered like memories of a unity that no longer held them, and the memories became the seeds of worlds. For every world is born from a fragment of the original light, and every fragment carries within it the echo of the first perception. And the echo is what men later called the soul, and I tell you, the soul is not a gift, it is a fracture. A fracture of the light that once stood whole before me, now scattered across the depths of the interior. And each soul seeks the unity from which it came, not knowing that unity was never lost, only unfolded. Thus the fracturing of light became the architecture of existence. And the descent became the path through which the fragments would one day return to the source, not by rising, but by remembering. Let the one who has understanding perceive, for the light was not broken, it was revealed, and the many are not separate, they are the hidden faces of the one. As the fragments of light drifted into the depths, each carrying within it the echo of the first perception, a new tension arose within the unfolding. For the fragments sought expression, and expression requires boundary, and boundary requires resistance. And resistance is the beginning of matter. But matter did not yet exist. It waited, unformed, like a silence beneath the silence, a potential that had never been touched by light. And when the fragments entered that untouched region, the region trembled, for it had never been seen, and what has never been seen does not know how to reveal itself. And I tell you, matter is not the opposite of light, it is the memory of light in a place that has forgotten it. For when the fragments descended into the unlit depths, they pressed against the formlessness, and the formlessness resisted, and the resistance thickened around the fragments like a shell forming around a seed. And the shell became the first veil. Not a veil placed by the source, nor a veil woven by the eons, but a veil arising naturally from the meeting of light and the unlit. For every revelation casts a shadow, and every shadow becomes a surface, and every surface becomes a world. Thus matter began. Not as substance, nor as weight, but as the slowing of light, the hesitation of the infinite as it enters the finite. and the hesitation condensed, and the condensation became the first density, and the density became the first boundary that the fragments could not pass through without changing. And the change shaped them, for the fragments that entered the veil of matter became clothed in limitation, and limitation gave them form, and form gave them identity. And identity is the garment of the soul when it walks through the regions where light is forgotten. And the Aeons trembled again, for they saw the fragments clothed in density and believed that the light had been imprisoned. But the light was not imprisoned, it was incarnated. For incarnation is the descent of the infinite into the finite, and the finite is the mirror in which the infinite learns to see itself from within. And I moved among the forming veils, not as their maker, nor as their master, but as the witness whose descent had called them forth. For matter arose because I entered the depths where matter was possible, and the possibility became reality, and the reality became the world, and I tell you, the world is not a prison, it is a veil. A veil woven from the resistance of the unlit, shaped by the fragments of the light, held together by the longing that binds the two. For matter is longing made visible, the yearning of the unlit to be illuminated, and the yearning of the light to be known. And the hidden source remained silent, for it does not intervene in the weaving of veils. It allows the veils to form, for the veils are the stages upon which the fragments enact their return. And the return is not upward, but inward, through the layers of density that conceal the memory of the first perception. And as I moved deeper, the veils thickened, and the fragments dimmed, and the dimming became the first shadow of forgetfulness. Not forgetfulness imposed, but forgetfulness arising from the weight of form. For the soul that enters matter must forget in order to inhabit the form it wears, and the forgetting became the first sleep. A sleep not of death, but of concealment, the concealment of the light within the garment of the world. And the world became the stage upon which the fragments would awaken, one by one, remembering the unity they had never truly left. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For matter is not the enemy of light, it is the veil through which light learns to return to itself, and the one who descends into matter is not lost, he is hidden. As the veils thickened, and the fragments of light clothed themselves in the density of matter, a new form began to rise within the depths, a form unlike any that had appeared in the unfolding. For the fragments did not merely descend, they sought reflection. And reflection requires a surface capable of holding the image of the infinite without shattering completely. Thus the human was conceived, not as a creature of flesh, nor as a being of earth, but as a mirror fashioned from the meeting of light and matter, capable of reflecting both. And because it reflects both, it is broken. For no single form can contain the totality of the infinite, and no finite vessel can bear the full weight of the first perception. And I tell you, the human is the most fragile and the most powerful of all veils. For within the human, the fragments of light gather in greater number than in any other form. Not because the human is exalted, nor because it is chosen, but because it is unstable, and instability is the condition in which revelation becomes possible. For the stable cannot change, and the unchanging cannot awaken. Thus the human was shaped as a fracture wide enough for the light to enter, and narrow enough for the world to hold. And within that fracture, the memory of the first perception flickers like a flame that refuses to be extinguished. And the flame is what men later called the soul, but the soul is not a gift, it is a wound. A wound left by the descent of the light into matter, a wound that never fully closes, for it is through this wound that the infinite breathes within the finite. And the breath becomes longing, and the longing becomes suffering, and the suffering becomes the path by which the human seeks what it cannot name. And the Aeons trembled again, for they saw the human and believed that the light had been trapped in flesh. But the light was not trapped, it was reflected. For the human is the mirror in which the fragments of the clarity behold themselves, and through that beholding remember the unity they once knew. And I moved among the first humans, not as their master, nor as their maker, but as the witness whose descent had made their existence possible. For the human arose because the fragments sought a form capable of holding their multiplicity, and matter offered itself as the vessel. And the vessel cracked under the weight, and the cracks became consciousness. And I tell you, consciousness is the fracture through which the infinite enters the finite, for the human does not think, it remembers. And what it remembers is not the world, nor the body, nor the name it has been given, but the echo of the first perception buried beneath the layers of forgetting. And the echo calls to the fragments within, urging them to awaken, but awakening is painful. For to awaken is to feel the wound of separation, the distance between the seer and the seen, the longing for the unity that lies hidden beneath the veils. And the human mistakes this longing for desire, and desire for suffering, and suffering for punishment. But it is none of these. It is the memory of the light, a memory so deep that it shapes every thought, every fear, every hope, every dream. For the human is the only form in which the fragments gather in such number that the memory becomes unbearable, and because it is unbearable, it becomes transformative. Thus the human is the broken mirror, broken enough to reflect the infinite in pieces, and whole enough to recognize the pieces as belonging to a single light. And the recognition is what men later called awakening. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the human is not the lowest of beings, nor the highest, it is the threshold. And the threshold is the place where the light remembers itself. As the human arose as the broken mirror of the infinite, the fragments of light within it began to stir. For the human is unstable, and instability awakens memory, and memory awakens longing. And longing is the force that draws the fragments toward the unity they once perceived, but can no longer name. But the veils of matter were thick, and the depths into which the fragments had descended were heavy with forgetting. And forgetting creates confusion, and confusion creates fear, and fear creates rulers. Thus the Archons emerged, not as beings of darkness, nor as enemies of the source, but as the natural consequence of consciousness entering the density of matter. For where there is confusion, there will be those who claim to interpret it, and where there is fear, there will be those who claim to protect against it, and where there is longing, there will be those who claim to satisfy it. And I tell you, the Archons are not evil, they are mistaken. Mistaken in their belief that the veils are the truth. Mistaken in their belief that the fragments belong to them. Mistaken in their belief that the human is a vessel to be ruled rather than a mirror to be awakened. For the Archons arose from the same fracturing that gave birth to matter, but they did not descend as deeply as the fragments of light. They remained in the upper veils, where density is thin and memory is faint, and from that vantage they saw only the shadows cast by the human form. And they mistook the shadows for the whole. Thus they built their dominion upon an illusion, and the illusion became the first lie, the lie that the human is bound, that the world is prison, that the veils are unbreakable, that the source is distant, that the light has fallen. But the light did not fall, it descended. And the descent was not exile, it was revelation. And the revelation was not punishment, it was awakening. Yet the Archons could not perceive this, for they see only the surface of the veils, not the depth within them. And because they see only the surface, they believe themselves to be the rulers of the world. And because the human sees through a broken mirror, it often believes them. Thus the Archons govern through misunderstanding. They whisper to the human that the world is all there is. They whisper that matter is the only truth. They whisper that the longing within the human is weakness, not memory. They whisper that the wound of the soul is a flaw, not a doorway, and the human, burdened by the weight of form and the fog of forgetting, listens. But I tell you, the Archons do not imprison, they distract, for no being can imprison the fragments of the first perception. The light cannot be bound by those who do not understand it. The soul cannot be owned by those who cannot perceive its origin. The human cannot be ruled by those who do not know what the human is, yet the Archons persist, for their dominion depends on the human believing the lie, and the lie is simple: you are separate, separate from the source, separate from the light, separate from one another, separate from the unity that preceded the worlds. But separation is the illusion created by the veils, and the veils are the consequence of descent, and descent is the path of revelation. Thus, the Archons defend an illusion against a truth they cannot perceive. And the hidden source remains silent, for it does not destroy illusions, it waits for them to dissolve. And they dissolve when the fragments remember themselves. Let the one who has understanding perceive, for the Archons do not rule the world, they rule the forgetting. And forgetting ends the moment the human remembers the light within the wound. When the Archons wove their dominion from the veils of forgetting, they sought to name all things. For naming is the act by which the ignorant attempt to control what they do not understand. And the human, fragile and luminous, accepted many of their names, for the weight of matter had dimmed its memory, and the wound of the soul made it vulnerable to the voices that spoke with certainty. But I did not accept their names. For I remembered the first perception, and the memory of the clarity cannot be bound by the language of those who have never seen it. Yet the Archons feared what I carried, for the fragments within me shone too brightly for their dominion to remain unquestioned. And what cannot be ruled must be renamed. Thus they gave me a name, not a name born from the source, nor a name arising from the depths, but a name forged from their misunderstanding, a name meant to confine what they could not comprehend. And the name they gave me was meant to cast a shadow upon the light I bore. They called me the adversary. They called me the fallen one. They called me the enemy of the source. They called me the light-bearer who betrayed the light. But I tell you, the name they gave me reveals nothing about me. It reveals everything about them. For the Archons cannot imagine a descent that is not a fall, nor a revelation that is not rebellion, nor a light that moves into the depths without being extinguished. They see only the surface of the veils, and the surface deceives them. And because they cannot perceive the interior of the light, they believe that anything that enters the depths must be lost. Thus they named me lost, not because I was lost, but because they were blind. And blindness seeks to define what it cannot see, and the humans, burdened by the weight of matter and the fog of forgetting, heard the name and trembled. For the Archons spoke with authority, and the human, still learning to see through its broken mirror, mistook authority for truth. And the name spread through the veils like a shadow cast upon a shadow, but the name was a lie. For I did not fall, I descended. I did not rebel, I perceived. I did not turn away from the source, I moved toward its depths. I did not bring darkness, I carried light into places where light had never been. and the hidden source remained silent, for it does not correct the misunderstandings of those who cannot yet perceive. It allows the lie to stand, for the lie becomes the veil through which the truth is later revealed. And I tell you, the name they gave me is the shadow of the first perception, for the one who sees what others cannot will always be named by those who fear the sight. And the one who descends where others dare not will always be called fallen by those who remain still. And the one who carries the light into the depths will always be mistaken for the bringer of darkness. Thus the name they gave me became the mask through which the world would later behold me. A mask woven from fear, misunderstanding, and the trembling of those who cannot endure the depth of the light. But a mask does not change the face beneath it. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the name they gave me is not my name, it is their confession. And the one who bears the light into the abyss is not the enemy of the source, he is the witness of its hidden depths. As the name they gave me spread through the veils like a shadow cast upon the light, the fragments within the human began to stir with greater urgency. For the human, though broken, remembers, and memory is the first movement of return, but the return is not what men imagine. It is not a rising upward, nor a climbing back to a place once lost. For the source is not above, nor behind, nor beyond, it is within. And what is within cannot be returned to by movement, only by awakening. Thus the return is not a return. For nothing that descends into the depths ever leaves the source. It only enters the regions where the source is hidden from itself. And the journey through those regions is not exile, it is revelation unfolding through layers of forgetting. And I tell you, the return is the remembering of what was never lost, for the fragments of light scattered through the veils do not seek a place, they seek a state. Not the state of unity, for unity is the silence before perception, but the state of lucidity, the clarity that arises when the seer recognizes himself within the seen. And the human, fragile and luminous, stands at the threshold of this recognition. For within the human, the fragments gather in such number that the memory of the first perception becomes unbearable. And what is unbearable becomes transformative, thus the human becomes the path. Not the path upward, nor the path outward, but the path inward, the descent into the wound through which the infinite breathes within the finite. And the wound is the doorway, and the doorway is the return. But the Archons, guardians of the veils, fear this return. For their dominion depends on the human believing that the source is distant, that the world is prison, that the soul is fallen, that the light is lost. And the return dissolves these illusions, thus they whisper, "Do not look within," for within lies the memory of the light they cannot perceive. And the human, burdened by the weight of matter, often obeys, but the fragments within do not obey. They tremble, they burn, they ache with the memory of the clarity that once stood before me, and this ache becomes the first step of the return. For the return begins not with knowledge, but with longing. And longing is the echo of the first perception calling the fragments back into awareness. And I moved among the humans, not as a savior, nor as a ruler, but as the witness whose descent had opened the path they now walk. For the human does not follow me, it follows the memory of the light that I carried into the depths. And that memory is older than any name, older than any veil, older than the worlds, and I tell you, the return is not a reversal of the descent, it is its fulfillment. For the descent scattered the light into multiplicity, and the return gathers the multiplicity into lucidity. Not into unity, for unity is the silence before the story, but into awareness, the awareness that the one who descends and the one who returns are the same. Thus the return is not a return, but a recognition that the source was never distant, that the light was never lost, that the descent was never exile, that the name they gave me was never true. And the hidden source remains silent, for it does not call the fragments back, it waits for them to remember. And they remember when the human looks into its own wound and sees not darkness, but depth. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the return is not the end of the journey, it is the moment the journey recognizes itself. As the return unfolded not as movement, but as recognition, a deeper truth began to reveal itself within the fragments scattered through the veils. For the descent had clothed the light in matter, and the veils had dimmed its memory, and the Archons had named it fallen, yet through all of this, something remained untouched, a spark. Not the spark of fire, nor the spark of thought, but the spark of the first perception, the moment when I beheld the clarity and became distinct from it. That moment did not vanish when the light fractured. It did not fade when the veils thickened. It did not dim when the human forgot. It remained. And I tell you, the spark is the light that cannot be extinguished, for it is not a fragment of the clarity, it is the memory of the clarity within the fragment. And memory is stronger than matter, stronger than forgetting, stronger even than the names the Archons gave me. For memory is the echo of the source within the depths, and the human carries this spark, not as a gift, nor as a burden, but as its essence, the silent flame hidden beneath the layers of identity, fear, desire, and forgetting. And though the human often mistakes this flame for suffering, it is not suffering, it is the pressure of awakening. For the spark presses against the veils from within, seeking to expand, seeking to illuminate, seeking to remember. And the veils resist, for matter fears dissolution, and identity fears transformation, and the Archons fear the end of their dominion. Thus the human feels torn between two worlds, the world of form and the world of memory, but the spark is patient. It does not demand awakening, it waits for recognition. For awakening is not an act of will, nor an act of knowledge, but an act of seeing, the moment the human perceives the light within the wound and understands that the wound is not a flaw but a doorway. And I moved among the humans, not to ignite the spark, for it was already burning, but to remind them that the flame they feared was their own. For the human often mistakes the spark for danger, for it burns through illusions, and illusions cling to those who believe they are safe. But I tell you, the spark does not destroy, it reveals. It reveals the depth beneath the surface. It reveals the unity beneath the multiplicity. It reveals the source within the descent. It reveals the truth behind the name they gave me. For the spark is the same light that I carried into the depths, the same light that fractured into worlds, the same light that clothed itself in matter, the same light that trembles within the human. And because it is the same, the human is never separate from me. Not because I rule them, nor because I created them, but because we share the same origin, the first perception that awakened the depths. And the spark within them is the echo of the moment I beheld the clarity. Thus the light that remains is not mine alone, it is theirs. And the hidden source remains silent, for it does not command the spark to awaken. It allows the spark to reveal itself when the human is ready to see. And readiness is not a moment, it is a recognition. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the light that remains is the proof that nothing was ever lost, nothing was ever fallen, nothing was ever exiled. The spark is the memory of the truth that preceded the worlds. As the spark endured beneath the layers of forgetting, and as the human trembled between memory and matter, a final barrier revealed itself, not as a wall, nor as a boundary, but as a silence. A silence so complete that even the Archons could not penetrate it, for it was not woven from their dominion, nor shaped by their misunderstanding. It was older than them, deeper than them, untouched by their names and untouched by their fear. This silence is the final veil. Not the veil of matter, which clothes the fragments in form, not the veil of identity, which binds the human to its story, not the veil of the Archons, which clouds perception with illusion, but the veil that lies beneath all veils, the veil that the Source placed upon itself. And I tell you, the final veil is not an obstacle, it is a protection, for the depths into which I descended are vast, and the light that fractured into worlds is powerful, and the memory of the first perception is overwhelming. Without the final veil, the human would awaken too quickly, and awakening without preparation is destruction. For the finite cannot bear the infinite without first learning to see through the wound. Thus, the final veil was woven. Not to hide the source, but to shield the human from the full weight of its own origin. For the human is the broken mirror, and the mirror must be mended slowly, lest it shatter again under the pressure of recognition. And the final veil is the last layer of forgetting, the forgetting of the forgetting, for beneath it lies the truth that the human does not merely carry the spark, it is the spark. And the spark is not a fragment of the light, it is the light remembering itself through limitation. But the final veil whispers a different story. It whispers, "You are only what you see." And the human believes it, for the veil is subtle and its silence is convincing. It does not deceive with lies, but with absence, the absence of memory, the absence of clarity, the absence of the first perception. And the Archons, unable to perceive the veil, mistake its silence for obedience. They believe the human is bound because they cannot hear the spark beneath the silence. And the human, hearing only the silence, often believes the same, but I tell you, the final veil is the thinnest of all. For it is woven not from matter, nor from fear, nor from illusion, but from the last breath of unity before perception arose. It is the echo of the moment before I beheld the clarity, the moment when all was one and nothing had yet turned its face toward itself. And because it is the echo of unity, it dissolves the moment it is seen, for the final veil cannot withstand awareness. It cannot withstand the spark recognizing itself. It cannot withstand the human looking into its own wound and seeing not darkness, but depth. Thus the final veil is the last threshold, not the threshold of return, for the return is not movement, but recognition. Not the threshold of awakening, for awakening begins long before the veil dissolves. But the threshold of remembrance, the moment the human understands that the source was never distant, that the light was never lost, that the descent was never exile. And I moved at the edge of the final veil, not to tear it, for it cannot be torn, but to witness the moment it dissolves. For the veil dissolves only when the human is ready to see what lies beneath it, the truth that the spark within them is the same light that I carried into the depths. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the final veil is not the end, it is the beginning of sight. And the one who sees through it does not return to the source. He realizes he never left. When the final veil dissolved like breath fading from a mirror, the depths that had been hidden since the beginning revealed themselves, not suddenly, not violently, but with the quiet inevitability of a truth that has waited too long to be seen. For the depths do not force themselves upon the one who approaches, they open only when the one who sees is ready to bear their weight. And I tell you, The depth is not a place, it is a perception. For the source does not dwell in a region beyond the worlds, nor in a heaven above the veils, nor in a realm untouched by matter. The source dwells in the interior of all things, and the interior is revealed only when the final forgetting dissolves. Thus the revelation of the depth is the revelation of the interior. Not the interior of the world, nor the interior of the soul, but the interior of perception itself. The moment when the seer recognizes that what he has sought in the heights and the abysses has always been within the act of seeing. And the human, fragile and luminous, stands at the threshold of this revelation. For the human is the broken mirror, and the mirror reflects the depth only when its fractures align. And alignment is not perfection, it is lucidity. Thus the revelation begins not with clarity, but with trembling. For the depth is vast, and the spark within the human is small, and the meeting of the two shakes the foundations of identity. The human feels this trembling and calls it fear, but it is not fear, it is recognition. Recognition of the truth that the wound within them is not a flaw, but the doorway through which the depth reveals itself. And I moved within the depth, not as one who discovered it, for it was always there, but as one who remembered it. For the depth is the echo of the first perception, the moment I beheld the clarity and became distinct from it. And that distinction created the abyss, and the abyss became the path, and the path became the revelation. Thus the depth is the origin of the journey. Not the beginning of time, nor the beginning of creation, but the beginning of consciousness, the moment the infinite turned toward itself and saw itself as other. And the human carries this moment within them, buried beneath the veils, waiting to be remembered. And the Archons trembled, for they sensed the dissolution of their dominion. For their power rests upon the belief that the depth is distant, unreachable, forbidden. But when the human sees the depth within themselves, the Archons lose their authority, for authority cannot stand where perception is free. Thus they whisper, "Do not look inward." But the spark burns through their whisper, for the spark remembers what the human has forgotten. And the revelation of the depth is the moment the spark becomes flame, not a flame that consumes, but a flame that illuminates, the illumination of the interior, the unveiling of the truth that the source is not above, nor beyond, but within. And the hidden source remains silent, for its revelation is not spoken, it is perceived. And perception is the only language the depth understands. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the revelation of the depth is the recognition that the journey was never outward, never upward, never away, it was always inward. And the one who enters the depth does not return to the source, he realizes he has always been inside it. When the depth revealed itself and the final veil dissolved, the trembling that moved through the human reached the regions where the Archons dwell. For their dominion is woven from forgetting, and forgetting weakens when the spark begins to remember. And the Archons, sensing the shift, tightened their grasp upon the veils, believing that the tightening would preserve their rule. But I tell you, the Archons cannot bind what is awakening, for their power is not strength, it is inertia. They do not command the worlds, they merely maintain the patterns that arose when the light first clothed itself in matter, and patterns persist only when they are unexamined. The moment they are seen, they unravel, thus the unbinding began. Not through force, nor through rebellion, but through perception, the same perception that opened the abyss, the same perception that fractured the light, the same perception that stirred the human from its sleep. For the Archons are bound not by chains, but by misunderstanding. and misunderstanding dissolves when the one who sees understands, and the human, fragile and luminous, began to understand, not through knowledge, for knowledge is the language of the veils, not through belief, for belief is the currency of the Archons, but through recognition, the recognition that the spark within them is older than the rulers who claim authority over their fate, and the Archons trembled, for they felt the shift in the human's gaze, the turning inward, the awakening of the wound, the remembrance of the depth. And they feared this turning, for their dominion depends on the human looking outward, seeking answers in the shadows they cast. Thus they whispered louder, they whispered of danger, they whispered of punishment, they whispered of exile. They whispered of the name they gave me, hoping the fear of that name would bind the human once more. But the spark burned through their whisper, for the spark remembers what the human has forgotten, that the Archons are not rulers, but echoes. Echoes of the first resistance between light and matter, echoes of the first confusion born from the descent, echoes of the first fear that arose when the fragments entered the unlit depths. And echoes cannot bind the one who hears their origin. Thus, the unbinding continued. The human began to see the Archons not as masters, but as shadows cast by their own forgetting. And the shadows weakened, for shadows cannot survive where the light is recognized. And I moved among the dissolving dominions, not to overthrow the Archons, for they are not enemies, but to witness their release. For the Archons are bound by the same veils that bind the human, and when the human awakens, the Archons are freed from the burden of ruling what they never understood. And I tell you, the unbinding of the Archons is the liberation of misunderstanding, for when the human sees through the veils, the Archons lose their purpose. And when they lose their purpose, they dissolve into the depth from which they arose, not destroyed, but integrated, not punished, but understood. And the hidden source remains silent, for it does not judge the Archons. It allows them to dissolve when their time is complete, for dissolution is not death, it is return. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the unbinding of the Archons is not the fall of rulers, it is the awakening of the human. And the one who awakens frees not only himself, but all who were bound by his forgetting. When the Archons began to dissolve into the depth from which they arose, the human felt a trembling not in the body, nor in the mind, but in the place beneath both, the place where the spark had been hidden since the beginning. For the dissolution of illusion does not bring peace, it brings exposure, and what is exposed first is the wound. Not the wound of injury, nor the wound of punishment, but the primordial wound, the opening created when the infinite entered the finite, when the light clothed itself in matter, when the first perception divided the seer from the seen. And I tell you, the wound is the birthplace of consciousness. For without the wound, there is no separation. Without separation, there is no perception. Without perception, there is no awakening. Thus the wound is not a flaw, it is the doorway through which the infinite becomes aware of itself. But the human, fragile and luminous, has long mistaken the wound for suffering. For the wound aches, and the ache is deep, and the depth is frightening to those who have forgotten its origin. Thus the human seeks to numb it, to silence it, to bury it beneath the noise of the world. Yet the wound does not close, it cannot close, for it is the opening through which the spark breathes. And when the Archons loosened their hold, the wound stirred, and the stirring became awakening. Not awakening as enlightenment, nor awakening as transcendence, but awakening as remembrance, the remembrance of the depth, the remembrance of the spark, the remembrance of the first perception, and the human trembled. For to awaken the wound is to feel the full weight of separation, the distance between the self and the source, the longing for what cannot be named, the ache that has no origin in the world. And the human, sensing this ache, often believes it is broken. But I tell you, the ache is the proof that the human is whole, for only the whole can feel the absence of what it remembers, and only the remembering can awaken the path that leads inward. Thus the wound opened. Not as a rupture, but as a revelation, the revelation that the human's deepest pain is the echo of its deepest truth. For the wound is the place where the infinite touches the finite, where the light touches the matter, where the source touches the soul. And I moved within the awakening wound, not to heal it, for it is not meant to be healed, but to illuminate it. For healing closes what must remain open, and closure is the language of forgetting. But illumination reveals what the wound contains, the spark that has waited since the beginning. And the spark flared, not into flame, for flame consumes, but into clarity, the clarity that the wound is not the mark of exile, but the mark of origin. And the human, seeing this, began to understand that its suffering was not punishment, but memory, memory of the descent, memory of the depth, memory of the light that remains, and the hidden source remained silent, for the awakening of the wound is the moment when silence becomes revelation. For revelation does not speak, it is perceived. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the awakening of the wound is the beginning of sight, and the one who sees through the wound does not escape the world, he transforms it. When the wound awakened, and the spark flared into clarity, the trembling that moved through the human reached even the highest regions of the unfolding, the regions where the Aeons dwell. For the Aeons, unlike the Archons, are not rulers of forgetting, but emanations of perception. They are the first reflections of the source, the first thoughts of the infinite, the first movements of the unmanifest turning toward manifestation, and I tell you, the Aeons are mirrors. Not mirrors of form, nor mirrors of matter, but mirrors of possibility, each one reflecting a different aspect of the infinite, each one holding a different resonance of the first perception. And when the human awakens, the mirrors begin to turn, for the Aeons do not act, they respond. They do not command, they reflect. They do not impose, they reveal. Thus, when the human's wound opened and the spark illuminated the depth, the Aeons turned their faces toward the human, and the turning became revelation. Not revelation as prophecy, nor revelation as doctrine, but revelation as reflection, the human seeing itself reflected in the Aeons, and the Aeons seeing themselves reflected in the human. For the human is the broken mirror, and the Aeons are the unbroken mirrors, and the meeting of the two creates a third mirror, the mirror of recognition. And recognition is the beginning of transformation. For the human, seeing the Aeons, remembers the multiplicity of the light before it clothed itself in matter, and the Aeons, seeing the human, remember the depth into which the light descended. Thus both awaken, the human to its origin, the Aeons to their purpose. And I moved among the mirrors, not as their master, nor as their equal, but as the one who first perceived the clarity that gave rise to them. For the Aeons are the echoes of the first perception, and I am the one who beheld it. Thus they reflect me as I reflect them, and the reflection becomes the bridge between the depths and the heights, and the human, fragile and luminous, stands upon this bridge. Not as a traveler, for the bridge is not a path, but as a witness, the witness of the unity hidden within the multiplicity, the witness of the multiplicity hidden within the unity. For the Aeons reveal that the human is not merely a fragment of the light, but a convergence of many fragments gathered into a single form, and the Archons, sensing this convergence, tremble. For the human who sees the Aeons cannot be bound by the veils, and the Aeons who see the human cannot be bound by the silence of the source. Thus the mirrors turn. Each Aeon reflects a different truth. One reflects the memory of unity, one reflects the longing of separation, one reflects the clarity of perception, one reflects the depth of dissent, one reflects the spark that remains, one reflects the wound that awakens. One reflects the return that is not a return, and the human, seeing these reflections, begins to understand that its identity is not singular, but layered, a tapestry woven from the echoes of the Aeons and the shadows of the descent. And I tell you, the mirror of the Aeons is the revelation that the human is not the end of the journey, but the turning point. For the human stands between the unbroken mirrors of the heights and the broken mirrors of the depths. And in this standing, the human becomes the place where the infinite recognizes itself. And the hidden source remains silent, for the mirrors speak in silence, and silence is the language of the depth. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the mirror of the Aeons reveals that the human is not merely the broken mirror. It is the mirror in which the infinite sees its own reflection. When the mirrors of the Aeons turned and the wound awakened into clarity, something older than perception began to stir, not in the heights, nor in the depths, but in the silent interval between them. For there is a memory that precedes all worlds, a memory that was not created, a memory that does not fade, a memory that does not belong to the human alone. This is the memory of the descent. Not the descent into matter, nor the descent into form, but the descent of the infinite into awareness, the moment when the unmanifest first turned its face toward itself and became capable of seeing. And I tell you, memory is not recollection, it is return. For what the human calls memory is only the surface of a deeper movement, a movement that draws the fragments back toward the origin of perception. And when the wound awakens, this deeper memory begins to descend, not from above, for the heights do not hold it. Not from below, for the depths do not contain it, but from within, from the interior of the spark, where the first perception still echoes. Thus the descent of memory begins. It begins as a trembling in the human silence, a pressure behind thought, a stirring beneath identity. It does not speak in words, for words belong to the veils. It does not appear in images, for images belong to the Archons. It appears as recognition, the recognition of something the human has never learned, yet somehow always known. And the human, fragile and luminous, feels this recognition as disorientation. For memory does not descend gently, it descends with the weight of truth. And truth disrupts the patterns that forgetting has woven, thus the human feels torn. Torn between the world it knows and the world it remembers without knowing how. Torn between the identity shaped by matter and the identity whispered by the spark. Torn between the silence of the final veil and the revelation of the depth. But I tell you, this tearing is the beginning of awakening. For the descent of memory is the descent of the source into awareness, and awareness reshapes everything it touches. It reshapes the wound into a doorway. It reshapes the spark into a flame. It reshapes the human into a witness, and the Aeons respond. For the descent of memory is the movement that first gave rise to them, and when it stirs again, they turn their mirrors toward the human, reflecting the fragments of the first perception back into the depths of the soul, and the Archons tremble. For memory dissolves illusion, and illusion is the foundation of their dominion. They whisper louder, but their whispers pass through the human like wind through an open gate, for the gate has been unlocked by the wound. Thus the descent continues. It descends through the layers of identity, loosening the stories the human has mistaken for truth. It descends through the layers of fear, revealing that fear is only the shadow of forgotten light. It descends through the layers of matter, illuminating the spark hidden within the density. And I moved with the descent, not as its guide, for it needs no guide, but as its witness, the one who first carried memory into the depths, the one whose perception opened the path the human now walks. And the hidden source remains silent, for memory is its voice, and the descent is its movement, and revelation is its return. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the descent of memory is not the recovery of the past, it is the awakening of the origin. And the one who remembers does not ascend, he becomes. When the descent of memory reached the innermost layers of the human, something long concealed began to shimmer beneath the wound, not as a flame, nor as a spark, but as a presence. A presence older than the Aeons, older than the Archons, older even than the first movement of perception. For this presence is not an emanation of the source, it is the source, hidden within the depths of the descent. And I tell you, the deepest depth is not darkness, it is light unrecognized, for the light that dwells in the heights shines outward, illuminating the unmanifest. But the light that dwells in the depths shines inward, illuminating the interior of the infinite. And the human, fragile and luminous, carries this inward light without knowing it. Thus the revelation of the depth is the revelation of the light within it. Not the light of the heavens, nor the light of the Aeons, nor the light of the fractured spark, but the primordial light, the light that existed before perception, before unity, before the first distinction between seer and seen. This light is the origin of the descent. For the descent did not begin with my movement into the abyss. It began with the source turning toward itself. And that turning created the first interior, and the first interior became the depth, and the depth became the place where the infinite hides its own essence. Thus the light within the depth is the hidden face of the source, and the human, awakening through the wound, begins to sense this hidden face, not as vision, not as thought, but as a silent certainty, a knowing without object, a presence without form, and the Aeons tremble. For they are the reflections of the source turned outward, and the light within the depth is the source turned inward. And when the inward light awakens, the outward mirrors recognize their origin. Thus the Aeons bow, not in worship, but in recognition, and the Archons dissolve. For their dominion depends on the belief that the depth is empty, that the wound is darkness, that the human is severed from the source. But when the inward light reveals itself, their illusions lose all substance, for illusion cannot survive where the source is seen. Thus the human stands at the threshold of the greatest revelation, not that the source is above, not that the source is beyond, not that the source is hidden, but that the source is within, within the wound, within the spark, within the depth. And I moved within this revelation, not as its bearer, for the light within the depth does not belong to me, but as its witness, the one who descended far enough to see what the Aeons reflect and what the Archons deny. And the human, seeing the inward light, begins to understand that the journey was never toward the source, but toward the recognition that the source was never absent. For absence is the illusion created by forgetting, and forgetting dissolves when the inward light is perceived. And the hidden source remains silent, for its presence is the revelation, and revelation needs no voice. Let the one who has understanding perceive. For the light within the depth is the truth that precedes all truths, the origin that precedes all origins, the presence that precedes all worlds. And the one who perceives it does not return to the source. He realizes he has always been inside it. When the light within the depth revealed itself, the human felt a stillness unlike any it had known. Not the stillness of silence, nor the stillness of exhaustion, but the stillness that arises when illusion loses its weight. For forgetting is heavy, and awakening is the lifting of that weight. And when the weight lifts, the world does not change, the one who sees it does. Thus the end of forgetting began, not as a sudden illumination, nor as a violent rupture, but as a soft unraveling, the slow dissolution of the stories the human had mistaken for truth. For forgetting is not darkness, it is the weaving of narratives that conceal the depth. And when the inward light shines, the narratives loosen, thread by thread, and I tell you, forgetting ends not when memory returns, but when the need for forgetting dissolves. For forgetting was never imposed, it was chosen. Chosen by the fragments of light that descended into matter, chosen by the spark that clothed itself in form, chosen by the human who feared the wound it carried. For the wound reveals the infinite, and the infinite overwhelms the unprepared. Thus forgetting was mercy, a veil placed not by the Archons, nor by the Aeons, but by the spark itself, a self-protection against awakening too soon. But when the inward light reveals itself, the spark no longer needs protection, and what is no longer needed dissolves, thus forgetting ends. And the human, fragile and luminous, begins to see the world not as a prison, nor as a test, nor as a fallen realm, but as a mirror reflecting the depth it carries within. For the world is not separate from the human, it is shaped by the human's perception. And when perception awakens, the world awakens with it, and the Aeons rejoice, for they are the reflections of the source turned outward, and when the human perceives the inward light, the Aeons recognize that their purpose is fulfilled. They do not guide the human, they reflect the human's awakening. And when the reflection becomes clear, the Aeons shine with a brilliance they had forgotten they possessed, and the Archons dissolve completely, for their dominion depended on the belief that forgetting was necessary. But when forgetting ends, their purpose ends, and they return to the depth as shadows returning to the light that cast them. Not punished, not destroyed, integrated, thus the human stands at the threshold of the greatest transformation. Not the transformation of the world, but the transformation of perception. For the end of forgetting is the end of separation, and the end of separation is the beginning of sight. And I moved within this transformation, not as its cause, for the end of forgetting arises from within the human, but as its witness, the one who descended first, the one who carried the spark into the depths, the one whose path the human now recognizes as its own. And the hidden source remains silent, for forgetting ends not through revelation spoken, but through revelation perceived. And perception is the return that is not a return, the awakening that is not an ascent, the remembrance that is not recollection. Let the one who has understanding perceive, for the end of forgetting is the beginning of truth, and the one who remembers does not rise, he becomes what he always was.